In an explosive new report released just about an hour ago by the Intercept, Jeremy Scahill and Ryan Devereaux exposed the government's secret rulebook for placing individuals, American and foreign, on the terrorist watch list. The 166-page document shows that neither irrefutable evidence nor concrete facts are necessary to designate someone a potential threat. And not even death can ensure removal from these lists. So for years, the government has refused to answer any questions, even in court, about this process. And now we have some answers. Joining me now in studio are Jeremy Scahill and Ryan Devereaux, investigative reporters for The Intercept. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
This is huge news because, as we said, for years people have been trying to get answers in court to find out why it is they were put on the list, why they can't be taken off the list. So essentially, Jeremy, what does it take to be labeled a terrorist threat by the government?
Well, I mean, first of all, what you have here, and we encourage people to read the entire document, is what amounts to a shadow legal system, and it's a legal system that the American people are not privy to information about. So you don't know if you're violating some reasonable suspicion that you may be a suspected terrorist, and you can end up being put on this list, and it has very serious ramifications for you. It can mean that that you're in a court proceeding that has nothing to do with terrorism, and the judge or the prosecutor can see that you've been labeled a known or suspected terrorist. You can be stopped in a routine traffic stop by a police officer at night, and when the officer runs your information, he's going to see you're a known or suspected terrorist. You may be on that list because of some tangential connection to someone that they believe may be connected to terrorism. They use this standard called reasonable suspicion to put people on the list, and it says blatantly in the watch listing guidance that neither concrete facts nor irrefutable evidence are necessary. And in fact, they say even if you're charged with a terrorism-related crime and a court acquits you, that still is not grounds for you to be removed from the terrorist list. So in short, what Ryan and I found in months of work on this was that the government is using a very dubious legal standard to apply the label of terrorist to people that may have no relationship to terrorism whatsoever. One of the more stunning statements in the document is that you do not need to be a member of a terrorist organization or of any affiliation with it to be labeled a part of that terrorist group.
So that's what the government considers to be reasonable suspicion, is a lack of any kind of proof, a lack of any affiliation direct with a terrorist group. Who is it then that is in charge of curating this list, of creating the list, of overseeing it?
Well, so the document that we received was prepared by the National Counterterrorism Center last year. So they have the responsibility of sort of consolidating the government's terrorism information. They receive all of this, information from different members of the intelligence community, law enforcement throughout the world, and they compile a big sort of classified database, and that information is ingested in there, and then that information goes through another process in which it's moved into a unclassified database and then spread out throughout this watch listing community so that police officers, like Jeremy mentioned, foreign governments, private entities can access this information and see, run a person's name and see if they're labeled as a known or suspected terrorist.
So this is something that the government constantly claims is a national security secret, which is why they can't talk about it in court, and yet they let foreign governments have a look at this list?
Yeah, well, foreign governments are part of the whole sort of watch listing system, as well as private entities.
Yeah, and so I mean, what we're talking about here is a system where certain foreign governments and certain private contractors. We tried to ask the U.S. government, the National Counterterrorism Center, for information on what kinds of private entities are given this information, particularly about American citizens, but in general, and they wouldn't answer that question. In fact, they wouldn't answer any of the specific questions that we put to them. They just issued a statement that we quoted in our piece that basically just defends the watch listing system. But at the end of the day, what we're looking at is a secret system that has gone from the Bush administration to the Obama administration, has dramatically expanded under President Obama, has given extraordinary powers to the executive branch to elevate the status of people on the watch list, to go after whole categories of people, and then upgrade, as they say, something that we normally think of as a good thing in an airport. They upgrade the status of an entire category of people on the watch list. They wouldn't answer for us what is a category. They wouldn't answer how many times have you used this. They wouldn't answer questions about why is it that a single unelected, non-Senate confirmed senior advisor to the president in the White House has the unilateral authority to elevate whole categories of individuals on the watch list. It's an extraordinary power.
And that's something that's new under the Obama administration, right? I mean, what else has this administration, Ryan, specifically expanded about this list?
Well, what's fascinating about this administration is that after 9/11, so there was this sort of explosion in the number of people that were watchlisted by the government. And then there was pushback in 2006. The numbers had really grown, and the government was being sort of criticized from the media, criticized by its own internal sort of reports that this thing was getting out of control. So they started paring down the list, particularly the no-fly list. And by 2009, it had really sort of trimmed down. But then Abdul Muttalib, the so-called underwear bomber, this young man from Nigeria attempted to blow up a plane on its way to Detroit, and that sort of changed everything. It was like Obama's 9/11 that almost happened. It would have been the deadliest attack on U.S. soil, since September 11th. And the president put a ton of pressure on the watchlisting community to start gathering as much information as possible, and the list just started skyrocketing. And so now we're in a place where we've sort of returned to those immediate post 9/11 years, where the government is gathering all of this information, even though members of the watchlisting community and repeated government reports have said that we're drowning in information. It makes it harder for us to do our job. And so, we should take a real hard look at whether this is actually making us safer.
I mean, Ryan and I interviewed law enforcement professionals, including former senior FBI agents, who said, the civil liberties argument could be made. But the argument we want to make is that this is an ineffective way of actually trying to prevent acts of terrorism, because when everything is labeled terrorism, nothing is terrorism. And there's this combination of they're drowning in names that are put on there based on fragmentary information. We have no idea how many people are on there that have no business being on there, because there's no outside oversight of this system. And so if you're an FBI agent in the field and you're trying to track someone that you actually know because you have evidence is involved with a terror plot, and you go in and you try to get a sense of this person's network, you will be inundated with all sorts of superfluous, meaningless information that will make your investigation harder.
Well, this is the same kind of needle in the haystack argument that we keep hearing from the government when it comes to the NSA, too, right, and the surveillance there. But one of the things that you constantly hear from those that think it's not so bad that the government might be sweeping up the metadata of millions of Americans is that, well, it's not really affecting them. They have nothing to hide. Who cares? And yet here, the people that are placed on these on the no-fly list, for example, their lives are affected. I've interviewed a number of them over the years who have, then they can't travel. Financially, this very much affects their lives. It also it makes it so there are great distances between them and their families. One of the men that I spoke to, his wife, he can't reach her because she's now in Pakistan and they haven't seen each other in years. Let's talk about some of the other things that you found too, in terms of what happens to an individual when they are highlighted and set aside. What is it that a TSA agent, for example,
are you talking about a dead person who they've put on the watch
no,
list, or a living person?
I'm talking about a living person. Let's say I'm on the list. I don't know. I'm going to the airport today. What are they going to be looking for?
You know that one of the things that you have to read the sentence a few times to realize that what you're reading is actually, they intended to write what it says, and that is that I'm going to say this slowly, the deceased spouse of a known or suspected terrorist can be placed on the watch list after they have died. They weren't on the watch list before their known or suspected terrorist husband or wife, before they died. But then after they die, they then take that person and put them on the terror watch list on the idea that maybe someone will try to use that individual's identity to travel. I mean, there's things like that are in there. So if dead people can get on the watch list, and the standard's pretty low for doing that, you can imagine what it's like for the living.
And to answer your question about if you're going to the airport, it depends on what list you're on. So the government keeps a number of lists, right? It has the selectee list, it has the no-fly list.
Which means that you're going to be pulled aside when you try to check in.
Selectee list, as Jeremy said, causes enhanced screening at airports, border crossings. The no-fly list is exactly what it sounds like, prevents you from flying in and outside of the United States. And this information is housed in the terrorism database, the main thing that we call the watch list. And so a TSA agent will sort of run your name when you're coming through. If your name pops up for selectee, then they'll pull you aside for extra screening. And if no fly, you're not going to get on the plane.
And they're also, I mean, they're interacting with a database that has by default categorized you as a known or suspected terrorist, even if the reason you're in that database is because of some tangential potential connection to someone who may or may not be involved in terrorism. And I mean, that's one of the most disturbing aspects of this. The Obama administration, the Bush administration refused to ever share any of these guidelines with the American people. But what's perhaps more offensive than that is that there is no way for you to find out if you are on these lists. This is being litigated in the courts. There have been a few out-of-court settlements. A judge ruled in June, just this past June, that the process for getting removed from these lists is unconstitutional. So this White House has to face some serious questions, because if we don't have the opportunity to face our accusers, what does that say about the constitutionality of this program that's all being enacted in secrecy, and the courts have nothing to do with overseeing it?
Well, not only that, though, I want to play a clip because, as you said, in June, a federal judge did rule that it was unconstitutional, and I was joined here on HuffPost Live by two individuals who had found themselves on the list. But not only that, they were then approached by the FBI and asked to become informants in exchange for getting off of the list. So here's a look at what Abe Mashal and Naveed Shinwari had to say.
They have been to my friends' houses and my family and a lot of people that they kind of, ruined my image with everyone. And that's been something that's been very troubling.
So they actually questioned my father-in-law. And I've been married to his daughter at the time for almost 11 years. I mean, it was like after I told them no to the informant position, they were kind of just, now all of a sudden their investigation on me started. It was the strangest thing. And I don't know what the point of it all was.
And by the way, Abe right there, is a Marine. He is someone who served the country, who you wouldn't think would have any reason to look suspicious. But that's the really crazy part, too, right, is that they're now using this to try to blackmail people by threatening to never let you off the list unless you work with the government. Do you think that we will see some type of accountability now that this information is out in the open?
It's possible. It seems like there's momentum moving in that direction with the case that we were just talking about. But one of the most important things to remember after watching a clip like that is that these sorts of policies, these sorts of programs that were whipped up in the wake of September 11th have overwhelmingly impacted the Muslim community, and they have had real impacts on real people's lives. And with that being said, these standards are written in such a broad way that they can be applied to any number of groups, political dissidents, protesters, activists. It really could be applied to anybody.
I mean, look in there. When they're defining as terrorist activity damage to government property, all these the nuns and peace activists that you hear of who go and they get onto a military base and they hammer on a silo, or they do something and then they get down and they pray and then they're sentenced to long prison sentences. Under these guidelines, they're considered potential terrorists. There's also a clause in there that says, damaging a computer exclusively used by a large financial institution. That could have very serious implications for online activists, hackers, depending on how you want to categorize them. It's so broad, and if you take that combined with the reasonable suspicion standard, this is basically like a global stop and frisk policy that they've enacted, and they have enacted it in total secrecy. It's very disturbing. The last thing I'll say about this is that just a couple of months ago, there was a court case of an American who believed that he was believed that they were wrongly placed into this system. And they demanded all of these documents from the FBI. And one of the things that they asked for was the sort of guidance that's used to put people on these lists. Attorney General Eric Holder, in a sworn affidavit, said that if these unclassified watch listing guidelines were made public, that it would provide a roadmap to subvert the system. And therefore, he invoked the state secret privilege to prevent guidelines from being made public. That's the extent to which this government is willing to go to try to prevent the American people from understanding the criteria used to label them terrorists.
As you mentioned, unclassified, two of these documents here, and just the idea that giving people a roadmap.
Unclassified but not public.
But yes, classified but not public, but just saying that, that something that is so vague and so broad in its definitions is actually going to give someone a roadmap seems absolutely ludicrous. Now, a statement was given to you by a spokesman for the National Counterterrorism Center. And they just said, this watch listing system is an important part of our layered defense to protect the United States against future terrorist attacks. Very kind of cliche, blasé response. How did the government actually respond when they first found out that you were going to publish this? Were they scared? Did they give you pushback?
Well, I think at this point, first of all, they know that we're from the Intercept. They know that we've been reporting on a lot of sensitive or classified or secret documents, and I think that this administration is getting used to the idea that secrets are going to be coming out, and more of them are going to be coming out. I can't talk about the nature of the conversation that we had with the National Counterterrorism Center other than to say this. We put to them a series of questions, almost all of which I think a reasonable person would want the answer to after reading this document. And they would not provide us with a single answer to it. They kept pointing to statute, and they were reiterating the sensitive security information aspect of this document. But they would not answer any specific questions. When I first emailed them, I got an email back within 2 minutes. I think that they have a very serious problem that they're trying to confront, which is that they're overclassifying documents. They are addicted to secrecy, and it is coming back to bite them because more whistleblowers are going to be coming forward.
Is there anything, Ryan, as we said, I mean, this is something that people have been talking about for years, anything that really shocked you once you finally got a chance to look at these documents?
Well, I definitely think the threat-based upgrade that Jeremy mentioned earlier, the power vested in a single, U.S. government official to upgrade the watchlisting status of entire categories of people is certainly striking. But in a way, it's not the most surprising document, right? It's so representative of the kinds of efforts that we've been seeing year after year after year since September 11th. This sort of overreaction continues more than a decade later. So, on some level, this wasn't a surprise at all.
And Jeremy, finally, since we have you here too, right now is a tumultuous time worldwide. If you look at what's happening in Ukraine, if you look at what's happening in the Middle East, and there's been so much discussion about the way that the media covers conflict areas, conflict zones like this, specifically when it comes to what's happening between Israel and Palestine and in Gaza. What do you think of the job that the media does, and do they give a fair assessment? Do they provide both sides of the situation, both narratives, or do they really cater to one more than the other?
No, I mean, we could say this every time I come on your show and talk to you. We've hit all-time lows with media coverage in this country. When you look at what's happening right now in Gaza, this is a massive massacre and one epic series of war crime after war crime, child after child being killed. And most news organizations are forced to acknowledge that the Palestinians and its children and whole families are being killed. They're forced to because cameras are there. They're forced to because there are reporters that are on the ground reporting on that. But if you step back and you look at the way that this is always framed over these weeks of Israel's constant bombardment of Gaza, it's as though Hamas and Israel are sort of two equal military powers fighting one another. How do they reconcile that with all of the pictures of the Iron Dome stuff and Israelis sitting up there and basically treating it like it's a barbecue and watching the missiles pop in the Iron Dome? We're talking about a nuclear-powered nation that has a history of systematically killing Palestinians, indiscriminately targeting civilians and civilian institutions. When it's covered in the media here, it's as though Hamas is the Palestinian people, and that it's just a battle between two military powers. The Israel is gratuitous in its disproportionate use of force against the Palestinians, and the only time you see that is when great reporters like Ayman Mohyeldin, who is a friend of mine, who was removed from Gaza right after he had witnessed the killing of 4 kids on a beach. He had just been playing soccer with them right before that happened. And of course, you've covered that, and that's a story unto itself. There's a scandal happening right now at MSNBC with Rula Jibril. Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli propagandists are largely given carte blanche to say what they want on American television with very little pushback. People should watch the interview that Jon Snow, a British journalist from Channel 4, who's a legendary sort of anchor, who actually is in Gaza right now. He's a fairly old man, and he went to Gaza. He interviewed the Israeli government spokesman and destroyed him. And that's how it was presented around the world. It's so pathetic that what was actually just a tough, good interview is viewed as having destroyed the spokesperson. Why do people perceive it like that? Because it never happens. You don't see that on American television. Well said.
All right, gentlemen, I have to leave it there, but thank you both, Jeremy and Ryan, for joining me today.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
And to read Jeremy and Ryan's new report, you can check out the links in the resource well below that will take you to The Intercept. And stick around. There's much more coming up on HuffPost Live.